Oh, I
Just
wanted
go land
like
in water and
boyish
jump
look.
off.
You also wanted to what?
I wanted a boyish look.
Dub.
Good
All right, I've started the recording.
I will
Anything you
explain
say
later.
will be used against you.
Mm.
Okay.
Not again.
Welcome to the first VOD review. Apologies if my energy is a little off today. I'll have to get back into the flow of things after a while, but today we're starting off easy anyway. We're going to be talking about Poke versus Brawl versus Dive, which should be review for most of you guys. You guys should know this basically already, but it's nice to get you guys thinking about it again. Before I go into anything, what do you guys know about Poke, Brawl, Dive?
Poke is stay back and do damage. Brawl is, I don't really know. Dive is pick a target and murder them.
Is it like rock, paper, scissors?
It's a little bit like rock, paper, scissors, but it depends. I'll get into that later. But
Okay.
it does kind of work in a little bit of a circle, but so the basic overview, we'll start with Brawl. It's one of the simpler ones, to understand. Say you're picking Reinhardt, right? What does Reinhardt want to do ideally, right? What does Reinhardt really like to do as a character?
Get close and smack.
Get in their face.
And more specifically, he likes to swing multiple enemies at the same time, right?
Yes.
He likes to just do 500 damage per swing and just demolish the entire enemy team, if possible. Now, that's not always going to happen, but that's his like best case scenario for him. So like 5 people walking through a choke, right? If the entire enemy team was here, I'm like single-handedly preventing all of them from walking just by standing here as Ryan. And Brawl's really good at like holding down a specific area and really denying it by just having high damage output at close range. And the best case scenario is you can use that close range damage and you can threaten people by just walking at them. So which characters do you guys think would be pretty Brawl focused? So we talked about Ryan as like the obvious one. How about some other tanks?
Ramatra.
Ramatra's pretty
JQ.
solid.
Short.
JQ's pretty solid as
Jungle
well.
Queen. Yeah.
Arisa's dependent.
Yeah,
Not
she's pretty
necessarily.
brawly. You would play her for a more brawly playstyle for sure.
Say Zarya's
What
probably
about Zarya?
I was
Zarya's
gonna say
also
Zarya,
pretty
but I
brawly.
wasn't sure.
Hamster.
You can at least see him, but Roadhog possibly.
Roadhog, I would classify him differently, personally.
Roadhog does not exist in
But-
Overwatch anyways, so...
Yeah.
Something that's important to think about is when you're thinking about Poke versus Brawl versus Dive, it is always relative to other characters on the battlefield, especially the enemies. Like, Cass compared to, we'll say, Tracer. Is he, what does that matchup feel like? What does Cass like to do in the, versus Tracer?
Keep some distance.
Yeah, keep distance, and that's kind of what we were talking about with Poke, right? Actually, let me, before I get into that, we'll get the explanations of the other two. So we talked about Brawl. So Brawl likes to be in your face, get into your face, and just kill you. And after they do that, they've used every cooldown. If they didn't get value on that first initial like burst of value, they probably lost the fight, right? Like if Reinhardt pins in, Lucio uses speed amp, Mei used wall, and you don't kill someone, what happens?
It
Most
devolves.
likely death.
You die after, more than likely. Because you just used all of your cooldowns and you have nothing to use defensively. Okay, so next one we'll talk about Poke. The most obvious Poke tank in my opinion, Sigma. What do you guys know about Poke?
You just want to like chip away at the enemy from a safe distance.
Right. Imagine that's a Reinhardt sitting right there. I'm not letting him walk up to me, right? I'm just shooting him, and if he starts walking, then I'm poking him like this. I'm poking him like this. He's coming up the stairs. I'm poking him like that. I'm poking him like that. You know, like I'm keeping my distance as he's walking at me, and when he charges at me, I throw rock and I continue to back up, right? The only time I would push into him is if he had such low HP and he had no teammates and he was like absolutely trolling, right?
That's good.
So that interaction is Sigma's whittling him down slowly, as Poke does. That's the concept that Poke like really thrives on, is playing slow and forcing resources over time, just with damage from a range. That's like the #1 thing to think about. So what Poke heroes do you think really go well with that playstyle? We'll say
What? What about Ash?
Ashe is fantastic at Poke. Yeah, she has really scary long range damage. Although
Yeah. Is Widow Poke?
definitely anything that gets picks at long range tends to be Poke.
Also,
Okay,
like
so
Hanzo as
Hanzo.
well.
Yep.
Most hit scan characters, I would believe.
Most hit skins, yeah, in general are kind of pokey.
What about like Tor? Where would he fall?
I'll talk about that later.
Okay.
And then the last one to really consider, the last like main, is Dive, right? So what do you guys know about Dive?
Get in, get out. And call targets. You focus on one target.
Right, there's a lot to it. It's like, okay, you're focusing all your damage onto one target. It's like Winston's damage. It's not like Reinhardt, right? Like I have to sit here and stand here and poke him down for a little bit. And the key difference is I've got the mobility. I can go in, put my bubble down, and then even if I don't kill someone, I can get out, and I haven't lost the fight, right? I'm safe. I can heal back up. I can get my resources again, and then I can drop down from this high ground, drop bubble again, keep forcing resources. Maybe I get a kill this time. Oh, maybe I get the kill. Maybe I get the kill. Oh, and then I'm out. In general, with Brawl, it's like you're gonna kill most people very quickly if you can. Like the fights are gonna be decided pretty decisively. But with Dive, you kind of have to play for space. So now that we've talked a little bit about each individual one, I think it's useful to think about how they interact with each other and how they play against each other. So in a Brawl versus Poke matchup, and we'll say Rein versus Sigma, what does the Rein ideally want to do?
Get out. I mean, you want to get close to the Sigma so you can try and cleave.
He wants to do this. Pin at his face
Yeah.
and just eat him alive, right? Ideally. And if not him, his team, right? Someone. He wants to pin some vulnerable target and just slash them and kill them. Now,
He wants to close the space that Sigma controls and make his own that he controls.
right, and so he needs to close that distance while getting his resources whittled down. So it's like each character has their set game plan, but it's like, can they execute the game plan or not? And what do you think is one of the deciding factors that determines whether or not Reinhardt will indeed close the distance on Sigma?
Cooldowns? Like if Sigma has rock.
Sigma will always have Rock in that matchup.
Okay.
We'll just say that.
Okay.
Because he's not going to use it ever. There's no reason for him to ever use it unless he's confirming a kill on someone else. And then at that point, you're already at a disadvantage, right? You're gonna have to think for this one. What determines whether or not Reinhardt can or cannot execute his game plan on Sigma?
Where the rest of the team is on both
That is
sides.
that is one answer. Yeah. So like, if the Sigma is standing like up here, and like they have an Ashe or something standing right here. Well, maybe that's a bad example. Hold on. Okay, the Sigma is standing here, right? And the Ashe is on high ground. If I'm pinning at the Sigma, like maybe I can block a rock and like start swinging on him a little bit, but this entire time this Ashe is up here just shooting at me, and I can't do shit. I can't do anything. Right? So if the enemy team has an angle on the engage, then it's not gonna work, right? So another way you can think about that is, what does the map geometry look like, right? So, can Sigma stand on this really annoying high ground, and I have to be like, alright, I'm walking up here, and he's shooting me the whole time, he's shooting me, I'm walking up here, he's still shooting me, he's still shooting me. I've got half my HP, I'm finally pinging across, I'm rocked, and I'm dead to have 3 people on the other high ground. So in that situation, Sigma, with his angles, will outplay Orion, who's trying to execute his game plan. Now that being said, it's not... Ryan going into the Sigma is not the only play he can make. Maybe he walks up here, he stabilizes, gets his resources back, someone's playing over there, and then he pins over to like the Ashe over here, and then he does this, and then he shields the rest of the damage, stabilizes, and then just like waits again. That's something he can try to do, right? So that in general, that's the game plan, but there's a lot of variability in how it gets executed in game, and it'll take some creativity for both sides. Okay, so that's Poke versus Brawl. Now, oh, another thing that you should consider with Brawl is something that's really strong is if you need to consider, can Brawl force point? So say the objective point is like inside this room, and I'm playing Reinhardt, and I'm just standing here, and I'm slowly winning the game because I'm standing on the objective, right? If you're the Poke team, not only do I not have to cross the distance into all your sight lines, you have to come into my area of domain, right? You're forced to come into the area that I control. So, if I just play for time, and like, the moment that you try to step too close, like, you're realizing from over on that high ground, like, you're not dealing any damage, it's just getting shielded, everyone's playing the corner. So you're like, I'm gonna go dropped over here to try and get an angle through this door. The Reinhardt team at any point, if they think you're like too greedy in your positioning, can just like pin at you and like speed amp and kill you, right? But it is actually very important for the Reinhardt team to identify when the angles are too greedy, because otherwise it is possible that the enemy team will get away with dealing way too much damage to you. Like say an Ashe walks up to here and just throws a dynamite and no one's looking at her and she just like walks away. Suddenly you're in a much worse position. So you kind of have to be on your toes and you have to be moving as a team. Yeah, so that's, in general, that's the sort of playstyle that Brawl likes, is forcing cart and being on top of people. It's like one of those two. Okay. So... okay, so Poke versus Dive. Say you're the Sigma standing on that high ground, and you've got like the... Actually, say I'm Dive, right? And the Sigma's standing up on that high ground, their Ashe is standing on this high ground. What does the Winston want to do in this situation?
Go for that Ashe.
Or just go for any squishy target, right? Any weak target. Like, going for the Ashe is the easy one. I can force coach, especially depending on the angle, right? Or if I have a Genji and a Tracer with me, I can just jump the Sigma half the time and just kill him with bubble and split him off, you know? It's like the playstyle that I was telling you about with the Reinhardt like pinning in and trying to like get on top of someone. Dive is actually much better at getting on top of someone. It's just a matter of their damage is a little weaker once they are on top of someone. But when you have multiple characters with lots of mobility getting on top of one person, a Genji, Tracer, Winston is going to be able to finish off a single Ana very quickly if they don't have any of their resources like forced out of them, right? Now that being said, if you're playing the Poke comp, say you're the Ashe standing up here, and you know that the Genji, Tracer, Winston are like looking to get on top of you, so you're like, okay, I know the Genji's over there, I'm gonna like rotate slightly, I'm gonna like shoot him while he's walking up, I'm gonna chunk his HP to half, and like if he doesn't have either a med pack or LOS to his supports, like say he's full flanking, if I just shoot him once or throw dynamite at him, he can't go anymore. because if he engages, he's just gonna die, or at least he's more likely to die, right? So you can shoot him once as Ashe, and then rotate across, try and like poke down the Winston a little bit, and then it's all about playing whack-a-mole with the divers as the poke comp, and being like, you can never engage on me because you never have your resources, because I'm always forcing them out from you. That's the sort of counterplay that you have between the two. Any questions so far or comments?
Yeah.
Is it all making sense?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yo.
Okay. So, and then we'll get into. Was the last one dive versus brawl, right?
I
And then-
believe so.
And then yeah, dive versus brawl. Yeah, I think that's the last one. I might be stupid. So. Generally, how does brawl like to play, in terms of positioning? That's my question to you.
Aggressive and just forcing as much as possible while also forcing their own.
Well, into dive, let's say, how do you position when everyone can outrun you?
Together.
Yeah, together, right? Because you want to make it so that if they're trying to like, if the Winston's trying to like dive you and say he's committing like bubble, you want to do your absolute best to roll this guy for even attempting to put a bubble down and do anything. You want to like try and wall him off if you can. You want to try and throw the cast grenade. You want to like, actually the perfect example is Junker Queen. Junker Queen's like particularly good at this. Say the Winston's in my face, right? Hold on. Say the Winston's in my face, right? He's like trying to go for cleave value on my team. I do this to him. Guess what? If he tries to jump away, I can time the knife so that at the moment he presses the cooldown to jump away, he gets pulled back towards me and his jump is gone, and I just demolish him.
His
So-
ability's gone at that point.
Right. So the brawl playstyle into dive tends to be to punish bad engagements.
So it's not particularly about killing, it's just about staving off and kills are byproducts.
Yeah, and depending on your character and how you play, like, there's ways you can punish. Like, so the Queen can punish a Winston for going in by potentially getting the knife off, right? Or a Reinhardt can actually try and punish the Winston by, say he's like zapping my team, and I like come from the other direction, and I just pin him into a wall. That happens more than you think, more often than you think. And it's not necessarily you always need to like punish the Winston or the tank. It's just that, in general, that is how the playstyle interacts with each other, right? As a fundamental. Alright, so let's talk about supports for a little bit. So, into these comps, what do you think, which supports do you think fit with which comp? We'll start with Ana. She's not necessarily
all
using
of
one.
All of the above.
All of the above, you said?
Yeah.
She is pretty versatile in the fact that, like, she can kind of get value doing a lot of those playstyles, but there is one that she is particularly good at. And I'll give you a hint by saying Brawl, Dive tends to be a lot stronger with their ults. Which I think I just gave you the answer.
Yeah.
Hold on. So you can play her in a lot of situations, but like she tends to be played with dive. And you might be thinking, wait, she doesn't have mobility per se, like what makes her so good at dive, right? Do any of the support players want to try and answer that?
A lot of healing for a hit scan.
For a hit scan?
No.
When she's scoped, yeah.
Oh, okay.
She can anti the dive targets too.
Oh, that's the biggest thing. because that is like the #1 thing next to her ult. Because say you have a team, a stacked team of a brawl team, right? Like say there's a brawl team like trying to rotate through this open space here. Say I'm playing Ana, they don't know I'm here, and I'm just like, tee-hee, you're all dead. Because if the Rhine doesn't block that, or something doesn't happen there, like, that's enough to have a Genji and a Winston go in and just clean everyone up. Every single person. Now, there is some counterplay, like you can throw out an immortality, right? But the nice thing about playing dive is that you don't even have to full commit to punish a nade like that. So what you end up doing is like you'll trade cooldowns and you'll be like, okay, I threw this nade, my team engaged on this nade, we forced at least immortality, maybe no one died, but like my Ana is still sitting up here, the rest of my team lived the engagement, hopefully, right? And then I mean that's what makes dive difficult, is you do have to like mechanically execute and live, right? But like nade is a shorter cooldown than immortality, so that when I get nade back, I just go oopsies again. and now they're dead. Now they're really dead. Because they don't have immortality anymore. And then, of course, with the ultimates too, it's like, actually we should get into ultimates soon. But okay, that's Ana, right? So she's really good with dive because she helps support her dive teammates to get more value because the anti-nade is so strong in that playstyle. And also her heals are really great for keeping up tanks that are deep in enemy backlines. Like if you really think about it, it's insanely difficult unless the other supports are also in to support a Winston who goes deep, right?
Yes.
Especially to the degree that Ana can. So if she has a good sightline, like, that's all that matters in dive, is the Ana sightline. It's like the most important thing. So now let's think about what Baptiste. I gave you a little hint earlier, but what do you guys think?
Poke.
He's not necessarily. He's a little bit of a. Yeah, he's a little bit of a Brawl-Dive-Poke. I would say. I'm trying to think how to explain it. It's having the immortality field is definitely very good in Brawl, specifically because, and it's like the most important thing about Baptiste's kit in terms of like his neutral, is if your tank is taking a trade with the enemy tank, like say it's a Reinhardt v Reinhardt situation especially, and they're swinging at each other, Baptiste has the burst heals that can, like I can right click right here and heal 2 people, both like the same amount, right? So when you're playing Brawl, you tend to be more stacked, so this healing tends to be more effective in that sense. And on top of that, being able to, when you're playing close quarters, tight maps, which is where Brawl tends to like really succeed, I can throw this immortality right here, and you can be playing on this corner as the enemy team, you can't even shoot it, and they can't even die. So he tends to get a lot of value in those situations. Whereas if it's really open, you can still use Immo, but it's like it's not gonna be as important. It'll be more important to like counter ults specifically than like using it in the neutral. And in fact, a lot of times you do use immortality to counter like one ult in a fight. And yeah, so but you will also find Baptiste being used in various poke comp situations. It's important to realize that he breaks the rules a little bit, especially with his ult, but we will talk about breaking the rules with ults in a second here once we get through all the supports. Let's see. Next important one. Zenyatta. What does Zen do? What kind of
Damage. A lot of it.
But like what's his playstyle?
Definitely poke. I'd say.
Definitely poke. That being said, there are niche situations where like Discord can be as potent of a engage tool as nade. So like you're using it with your dive team to like say a wrecking ball and a tracer like slam and like walk up on that guy. He's not having a good day, is he? Because he's discorded. The only thing is that it's a little bit of greedier, especially these days in Overwatch 2 with the brick changes to do that, because you can't really stave off the divers as well as Zen, and that's kind of that tends to be the key weakness to a lot of poke characters. Is like if they can't keep the divers away, then they kind of just die. So yeah, he's significantly very poke. Now what about Lucio?
Brawl / dive.
Brawl, yeah.
You'd think dive, but like, so something that I should note about dive is that in order for dive to work, you need multiple angles of engagement in order to, I mean, in any engagement, you tend to want multiple angles unless you have significant advantage otherwise. But like, in all things equal, or even in disadvantage, you need angles, which is kind of what the mobility is for. So like, you have Tracer Genji coming from 2 different angles, and that's what their mobility allows them to do, right? The problem with Lucio in dive is that if I have a Genji flanking from over there and I have a Tracer flanking from over here, I can only heal and pocket like one of them, and even then I'm like split from the rest of my team, and it takes me like time to help my team if they're split. So like, while Lucio can do some, like, he has some ability himself and he can do some dives, the problem is in his ability to like keep his team up before the engagement actually happens. So because of that, like, he's significantly more potent in brawl type situations, and that's really important to keep in mind, is that like, even if you're playing a high mobility comp, if you're playing with Lucio, you want to play stacked, like, more or less, right? Because that's how he gets the most heals, that's how he gets the most value to speed. Like, it's really quite important to stay together. So he tends to be more brawl focused, and a Reaper with a Lucio is scary, trust me. Okay. And like, consider the playstyle too, where like, you have the Reinhardt trying to kill the Sigma on high ground. It's so much different to go from this, right, to this, right? It's just so much more threatening, and in terms of countering the poke playstyle, you're gonna have significantly fewer resources forced by simply walking faster, right? And it's also gonna be just harder for them to hit abilities on you, period. Okay. Here's a little bit of a trick question. What kind of character is Mercy? What kind of archetype does she tend to fulfill?
Enabler.
Well, enables what kind of playstyle there?
I want to say poke.
I wanted to say poke too, but it's like,
Alright,
not sure.
why poke? Talk through it.
Because you can damage boost whoever's poking, and then their pokes are more threatening.
The damage boost is pretty, is one of the biggest tells that she is good for poke, I agree. And like, if you think about what happens in a poke is, especially in a neutral where like both teams are poking, right? In like a mutual, both teams are trying to like not necessarily go for engagements, but try to just like force out resources mutually. Mercy is really good at just like standing around a corner, damage boosting, healing up like slight chip damage, which is what really common in poke, right? Because no one's dealing fatal damage, everyone's doing chip damage, right? She can heal up the chip damage and like make it so that our chip damage does more. So if we're playing slow, Mercy is gonna be like able to pocket, especially like a poke DPS, to win those fights. in like pressure tanks a lot more. So Mercy tends to be more poke oriented, because to all the people who have ever tried to pocket Genjis and stuff on Mercy, you probably realize that you get left in the dust very often. Because you'd think that she'd be able to like live with her mobility, but it's really not that hard to just shoot her if she's like being aggressive with her positioning.
I'm at the height of my performance.
Okay. Alright, now for a true trick question, okay? What does Brig do?
She can help enable poke with her shield, but she can also brawl. Like if you have a Zen, you can bodyguard your Zen so he doesn't get dove.
She's an interesting special case, right? You're like, okay, well she's not necessarily providing pressure in the poke phase because she's a melee character. The best she can do is throw out a whip every now and then, right? And that whip, granted, provides healing in the area around her, so there is some poke value to be had there, right? Something that's really important to keep. So I'll just go ahead and create this like sub classification called anti-dive, basically, where she doesn't really fit perfectly into anything else, but she's a little more anti-dive. Like if a tracer's trying to get on my Ana from here, if I whip her once, she's having a bad day. She needs to go find a health pack. She needs to recall because suddenly she's gonna die to like one whip. I can like shield bash her at any point that she's not looking at me. Like it's really hard to deal with as a diver sometimes. A Brig who is protecting her backline, and on top of that, even if dive DPS are taking duels with other dive DPS, the ability for Brig to send out packs to other dive DPS allows them to win that duel. So Brig allows, she is dive in that sense, right? She is a dive healer because she is one of the best abilities to heal dive DPS in the game, because packs are so strong, because they take the pack and then I can like look away and they get healed for like multiple seconds after I look away, right? And I don't even have to look for teammates around the corner to like get healed by Inspire, right? So she's good with and against dive in general, right? Especially against, because she's got some specific interactions against dive tanks where like Doomfist is punching and then like she counter pins him and then he goes on the ground, for example. Or he was flying in and she whips her back and she like can't get the high ground. All the dive tanks have interactions where Brig can stuff her engagement. So she tends to be quote-unquote anti-dive, which is when I said we were talking about Torb and he's a little bit of a special case, starts to make a little bit more sense, right? He seems to be one of those special anti-dive characters too, right? Because any Tracer players in the room right now?
Yeah.
How annoying is a Torb turret?
You can't kill it.
Dude, I've seen many Tracers pulse bomb a turret out of frustration. If that tells you anything. Now that being said, I think Torb doesn't really actually counter quote-unquote dive. It's more of a it's nice, and in some situations and some placements of the turret can really make it difficult, but like if you're coordinated with your dive, say the Winston jumps them and like bubbles it off, the turret's not gonna break the bubble, you know, like, and worst case is like you've got an Ana or like an Echo or like a Genji or an Ashe on your team. All you have to do is the dive team, and keep this in mind, anytime you're playing against a Torb ever, and you're a dive character especially, just poke the turret out. Just play extremely slowly until the turret's dead, and then you can just go in from there. And granted, that might take some coordination to be like, hey, can we break turret? Can we break turret? Okay, yeah, we broke turret, we can go. But in general, that's his quote-unquote playstyle, is anti-dive.
Does Symmetra fall into that? Sorry.
Is where I say it is.
Because she can enable Brawl with, like, especially Zhang with her teleporter.
So I would actually say more so now than before. She's a little bit more anti-dive, but she's still very susceptible to dives herself. Here's the problem with Sim, okay? You can throw... The thing is, you can throw turrets on flanks, and especially with the recent changes where, like, when it hits someone, they get marked... actually, maybe I can show that off real quick. They get marked through walls now. So, like, if you... It's kind of like a Venom Mine in the sense that you throw it on a flank, and then if a Tracer walks through here, and suddenly your entire team's like, oh, there's a Tracer over here. And that knowledge alone goes a long way to countering a dive, is just knowledge of location. And then another thing as well is the teleport being a potential tool to peel and engage is also real. Like, that is a potential you can use the teleport for, right? Depending on the map. The only problem with Sim against the dive situation is you can, as the dive team, you can either burst her more often than not by splitting her with, like, bubble and just bursting her down with, like, a Genji Tracer, right? Or you can just ignore her entirely, because by the time she gets full beam off of the engagement, everyone is already out. Everyone's already left, right? So it's not that it's necessarily easy to, like... It's not that Sim doesn't have tools against dive, it's that dive is just favored, technically, at, like, a theoretical level. But yeah, you can use her in that way. Especially if you get creative with it and, like, play as a team with the teleport. For sure. Okay, so I think we got a lot of the fundamentals down for Poke, Dive, and Brawl. I would like to talk about ults, but first, are there any questions about any maybe specific characters or concepts? Anything we've talked about so far?
What is Life
Visor a
Weaver fall?
useless ult?
Wait, so one question was Life Weaver, and what was the other one?
Is Visor a useless ult?
No. They actually made it worthwhile recently, and I'll show you why.
Nice.
I wouldn't.
I mean,
It's not
I
as
just
good as other
played
ults, but
It was useful against a pharmacy.
it can be. Depends on their positioning. If they're playing corners, then it doesn't do anything. So how it used to work is you'd pop the ult, and you'd be forced to do body shots, but now, if you're actually aiming, you can hit headshots. So you can, like, be sloppy and try to aim for headshots, and even if you miss, you still get a body shot, right? Because, like, it's kind of hard to see because these are, like, standing still and they have the head hitbox of a giant, but say I'm, like, missing and I'm, like, going over his head missing, these would just be body shots, even if I was missing. So it's a lot better than ult these days.
Right.
So you asked, what is Life Weaver? The answer is not many people are even sure he does anything. But there is one situation that Overwatch League players have argued by trying to play him in. The problem is that even what the situations he's supposed to be good in are kind of bad because the character's just a little buggy. But I'll give you the situation. I think it was Vegas Eternal was playing Life Weaver into London Spitfire. And the thing about London Spitfire is they are known to play brawl comps. And the map was Watchpoint Gibraltar, which is a very dive-centric map because of all the high grounds. And that's another thing, by the way. In terms of the playstyle for dive, you really like being able to cycle cooldowns. And so when you have a high ground as Winston, you drop down, place bubble, and then you jump away. As opposed to, if I was Winston on the slow ground, you'd be able to poke me, you'd be able to, like, poke me, it'd be really annoying. I'd have to, like, jump to safety. I'd have to, like, jump onto a high ground maybe next to you, but, like, try to play the spacing, I won't get as much value. As opposed to if I'm dropping right on your backline from a high ground, I mean, there's nothing you can do because you can't poke out any resources, right, from the Winston. He just does that for free. It's all about the forcing resources. But anyway, that's a side note. They played Life Weaver into the Brawl comp on Gibraltar. So the question is, why do you guys think that's the case? Think about Reinhardt making rotations onto high grounds and what Life Weaver can do against a Brawl.
Well, he has automatic high ground with his pedal, and he
That
can
is
pull
very
other
nice,
people
right?
up.
Say they chase you off the high ground, and you throw this down, and you're like, oh, well, we have high ground and you don't. That's pretty nice, right? And also, in terms of playing against Brawl comps, you always want to... You're never forced to go for an engagement against a Brawl comp until they force your hand. Until they're already on top of you, right? Or, like, are threatening to kill your backline, right? So, Life Weaver, his damage is actually surprisingly nice into Reinhardt's shield, because it has the spread, right? But when you're shooting the shield from far away, it can actually be a significant amount of pressure to the shield while everyone else is shooting it, right? And especially because the Brawl team is inherently going to have less potent poke, so you're not necessarily worried. You're actually kind of out-poking them in that scenario, right? As Life Weaver, which is kind of strange to say. Now, of course, there's niche scenarios even inside of the Brawl comp where, like, they pick Ryan Widow or something, and you have to be careful with that at least, but it's like, that's some of the reasoning, right? And then, like, worst case is the Ryan gets on top of someone on your team and then grip. So he's got two tools to, like, disengage your teammates from the Brawl when they finally get on top of you, right? Which is really strong. And then also, you can technically try and use your ults to, like, as almost like a Mei wall to prevent them from getting value on your team. Like, maybe Ryan goes for Shatter and you block it with your ult, right? So it's all about getting, like, micro value like that with Life Weaver if you want to counter Brawl comps. That was kind of long-winded, but I hope that explains the theory behind what Life Weaver could do. But, like...
If he wasn't bad.
Yeah. And keep in mind that the Brawl comp can, like, when you're pulling someone, a good Mei can wall your face and it will break. I'm pretty sure it'll just break the grip. Or at the very least, it'll like prevent them from going on high ground. You know what I mean? Like they'll hit the wall and then fall off. Like, say I wall this, they'll hit the wall and then they'll like fall down. Yeah. Any other questions before I get into ults?
Ooh, that's precise.
Take a sip of my drink. Man, I miss talking about this game. I'm such a nerd. Okay.
You and me both.
So, we've talked about some of the fundamentals between what Brawl, Dive, and Poke likes to do in terms of their general game plans, right? Something to keep in mind is that ultimates break these game plans wide open, and suddenly you're like, we have Nano this fight. We can just... a Winston with Nano is going to single-handedly brawl their entire team. It breaks the rules a little bit, right? Because suddenly the Winston's doing more damage than the Reinhardt can even try to do to him, right? Because he's got the damage resist and the damage boost. So he's just cleaving everyone, he's like having a great time, and then afterwards the Winston pops Primal for another trillion HP, and he's displacing everyone, dealing so much damage, and if any of the supports or DPS get any value off that, people are gonna die, right? So, especially in Dive, you need to really be considering, like, if you're having a tough time in your matchups, you need to play slow until you get ultimates, if you feel like you can't do anything, because you can just, like, it even plays against the whole poke thing, because if you're poking a Winston, right, but he's not trying to go in, he's just farming the damage off you to build Nano, you're not actually preventing him from doing an engagement, because he wasn't going to engage you anyway. So you're building Nano, and then suddenly, when he does, you've just, like, focused all of your damage, and everyone's maybe 20-30 to ult on your team, because you've all been shooting a Winston, but because all of the ult charge has been focused on the one target, the Ana can just heal it up all the way, and you can just go for a really early, like, nano engage as, like, the first play you make is dive, sometimes. And that's something you really need to consider, is that into weird comps, like, you always have that play, as dive. It's really, really strong. And then once you get ults rolling on dive, you just snowball the entire game. And for that reason, actually, Sombra is like a top pro character right now. Well, because like being able to disrupt even half a second against mobility characters is enough to execute them. But like the ultimate that she has is also one of the best ultimates in the entire game, hands down. Which is why she's so strong. Because imagine a Winston and a Genji or a Tracer like engage these two right now. They're dead, right? If those are supports, they're not throwing nade, they're not throwing sleep, and they're not throwing packs, and they're not throwing whips. Like they're just dead, right? Very, very strong. One of the scariest in the game. Let's see, what's a good example? Okay, so Cass is kind of a hybrid character, right? He's got the slight long range damage, but in general he tends to be more brawly because of his close range, like, especially with the damage fall off nerf he had recently. He tends to want to play like with his Reinhardt and like playing to pressure frontline and like pressure the enemy tank or flankers even. But he can break the rules a little bit sometimes because if you look at his ultimate, what kind of ult does he have? We talked a lot about this last year. Zoning, but also it's when Cass uses his ult, what is the effective range of his ult? Like when is it strongest?
Like
When everyone's out in the open.
When everyone's out in the open. And it can even be extremely far, right? Like this is Widow range, and I killed him. You see that? His ult breaks the rules on what his character can do. Suddenly he's very formidable at long range with his ultimate, and if there's no cover, right? So, even though you're playing a brawl comp, right, there might be situations where you're like, we have high noon here, let's high noon them early in this long open like corridor to force out resources, and then we can walk into them after because we've poked out all their resources. We can walk through all this open space because if they even try to take that fight, they're dead, right? And that's kind of what's nice about Baptiste as well, is that his ultimate's really good at taking space. And Baptiste's damage as well, remember, like, he is poke, but he just has a lot of good frontline damage anyway, plus on top of the splash shields as we talked about. So Baptiste's window in the brawl comp actually functions extremely similarly, if not even better, because you're just like, you can use it to semi-brawl, right? Or you can use it to control an entire like area where you're just like one-shotting people with Cass and Bap, right? So Rhine comp can poke you out sometimes if you're not careful, and you just like leave yourself out in the open. Or let's take Sigma as another really good example of breaking the rules. Because he's like one of the most quintessential poke characters, right? It's gonna take a second. But his ultimate, Gravitic Flux, right, allows him to break that rule by basically being one of the best brawl ultimates in the game. Because whoever I mean, it's also a good poke ultimate, I'll explain that to you. But oh wait, I forgot about this thing exists! That's so funny. Okay. Like, say there's a Reinhardt right in front of my face. I just like shoot him a little bit, and then suddenly he's like flying in the air. He's gonna take half his HP. He can't move, right? It's one of the most consistent ways for Sigma to win the brawl fight. So like, a really common situation it's like one of the reasons that Sigma works in certain situations is like, say Sigma's like playing high grounds or he's playing a really annoying like position to reach for a brawl comp. He just shoots them over and over again, and because he's splashing, or he's theoretically like splashing and hit their entire team, like he's building his ult really quickly. The hope is that he either kills them in the neutral, or like by the time they finally get on top of him, he just has his ultimate to close out the fight and he wins the brawl anyway, you know. So you have to think about ults as shifting the playstyle of the game throughout the match, and being like, this ultimate is coming online, so we can't play in this certain way, or else we're just gonna get rolled by this, right? And that concept alone brings a lot of complexity that'll take a long time to like master. So I'm just wetting your toes a little bit in the water.
Gotcha.
I think that's pretty solid for this this concept review. Any questions so far, or? Oh, and I'll say one more thing. When I was talking about ults making things relative to, like, they have this ult, so now they poke better, or now they brawl better in this fight, something to consider too is that, like, we'll take a character like Cass. It's like, okay, he tends to brawl, as I had said before, but, like, if I'm playing Cass into Tracer, right, if the Cass is standing on this high ground, he might as well be an Ashe, he might as well be a soldier. I'm not poking him, he's poking me, right? That's how that interaction goes. So I need to like use my mobility to like avoid his damage. I need to wait, and then I, like, once I get my resources back, then I can like go on to him, shoot him a little bit, blink again, because all of those blinks are really important for taking that duel, right? And if I get shot once, or if I get a blink force, I can't take that duel anymore, right? Like, Tracer kills Cass if she has all her resources or gets the drop on him and gets like one free clip, right? But if the Cass doesn't allow that, if he stands in a place that makes it hard for her to get to him and shoots her even once, like, it makes her life significantly harder unless there's like a mini, or she can get resources from like a brig. So it ends up being relative. And it's like, now that being said, Cass pokes a Tracer, but guess who pokes a Cassidy? A Widow. Because if that's a Cassie right now, he is not shooting me. He is dying to a headshot, right? So that's something that's important to keep in mind, and especially with a character like Echo, for example, she tends to rest in the middle between poke and dive, where she's content to play high grounds and like poke out supports, poke out DPS, right? And you can't really force her out of her position. That's kind of what makes her such a strong poke character, is that you can't dive her as easily because she has mobility, right? That kind of breaks the rules, as we talked about before. And then on top of that, she has mobility, so like she can just go for the execute as well. And the way you can flip between those playstyles is really what makes the character good and keeps the enemies on their toes. And if you can do that mid-game, realizing which is better in which situation for which map geometry will make you an extremely good player, I promise you. Yeah, that's really the majority of what I wanted to say. Yeah, any questions?
None that come to mind.
Damn, that whole VOD review was like almost an hour exactly, so I think that's pretty perfect. So what we can do now is, whoever wants to volunteer as tribute, we can watch their gameplay from the tryouts and start doing.
I'm down.
Hey,
Who said me?
hey, Goofy.
Alright, we'll watch you first. Okay.
I posted all the codes.
You did. Okay, I will stop recording on this one, and I'll probably start recording for the next one, so...